The movie opens up in a war zone named the Somme, 1917, with many soldiers and rifles in their hands. They are standing on a narrow pathway with helmets and binoculars and share the same dress code. Their captain reached there, and they started moving towards the edges, making room for their captain to pass through it. In the next scene, Captain was talking to his soldiers, and suddenly they heard a loud noise. The enemies attacked them with poisonous chemicals that burnt their clothes and skin. The war began, and both sides were equally participating. The soldiers are now on the battlefield and attacking with guns and other large weapons. The scene jumps to a medical camp where the soldiers are cared for and treated well. A soldier entered on a stretcher, and the doctor was supposed to remove the German bullets from his body. 2 shots were inside the body, but the doctor felt another. He pulled it, but it was not a bullet but a piece of silver carved in the shape of a shell. The injured soldier is reciting some nursery rhyme. The soldier could not bear the pain and died at 8 for silver. The following scene switches to 35 years back, when a well-dressed woman stepped out of a gig and asked the waitress about the health of someone. She responded in a low tone and replied, "He is not well." The lady started looking at the photos nearby and heard a sudden name of Charlotte, the main character who is a young girl, and another main character, a cute young boy, Edward, spoke her word and started teasing her. She ran after him, both chuckled, and they started making noise. An old lady forbids them to make this noise and moves to the kitchen, where 3 servants make delicious food. The old lady, Isabel, Edward's mother, asked Anisa, one of the maids, to boil her some water and leave. The scene switches to a man with a gun, going to hunt a rabbit and put it on the kitchen shelf. Charlotte, who was studying, got scared by the gun noise, looked up and continued reading. In the next scene, Isabel is taking a bath, and Laurent, her husband, opens the door accidentally. Both see each other, and instantly the man leaves. Maid is helping her dress up, and she sees Edward from the window playing with the sword. The scene switches to a group of people moving on horses with necessities of life. It seems like slums settled on a short piece of land where they started doing their daily chores. Some are drawing water from wells, cooking, kids are playing, and some are washing clothes. An old lady spoke to the man, gave him a pot of silver coins, and asked him to make them ready and predict a storm. The man holds the coins, melts them, and makes silver teeth with them. He also broke a skull from the jaws and put it aside. He gave the teeth to the same old lady, and she put them on a stone surrounded by candles and considered it some spiritual thing that would protect their generation. In the next scene, the man leaves, and the old lady read their holy scriptures in her mouth. The scene jumps to Mr. Lawrence Seamus' home, where Edward and Charlotte are sitting on the stairs talking to each other about a meeting happening in a room. Edward suggested sneaking into the room and listening to the forum. Both moved towards the space and hid behind the door. A group of elderly men is sitting around a table and talking about those slums who camped in the Woodfield and Dyes Rock. These people are gypsies. The camp land belongs to them, but no record is available. They are talking about removing these people from the ground. Charlotte and Edward are hearing all of this, then suddenly, a maid appears and asks them to leave and close the door. The scene switches to the Woodfield, and these elderly men reach there with their weapons. They wanted these people to get off the land, but they refused. As a result, they killed all the people there and burnt their camps. These men celebrated their victory and took a picture all together. In the next scene, the old lady with silver teeth and a man tried to escape, but they got caught. The man's hands and feet were cut alive, and the old lady was buried alive. She cursed them for poisoning their sleep and the next generations. They hanged the man as a bird scarer where the old lady was buried. The old lady held tight the silver teeth in her hand and started reading scriptures. The men buried her and other dead people on the same land beneath the bird scarer. The scene switches to Edward and Charlotte, where they are signing a traditional song with their mother, Isabel, and a piano. In the next scene, Charlotte is standing in front of the bird scarer and digging up the same silver teeth, and suddenly the face of the bird scarer is inverted backward, and Charlotte awakens with a jerk. She was dreaming all of this. The scene switches to a dark place, and it's raining heavily. A man, a pathologist named John McBride, entered a hotel and tied his horse outside. He booked a room for the night and asked the receptionist about any report regarding gypsies. The receptionist answered with some hidden words and served him the food. The receptionist sits with the man, and again they talk about gypsies. The scene switches to Edward, where he hits a tree with a sword, moves toward the same bird scarer, and digs up the silver teeth. The old lady who holds the silver teeth instantly appeared at a distance and started moving towards him. He screamed, and suddenly the scene switches to a dark place, and Charlotte and his family run toward him. It was Edward's asleep. Timmy, the eldest boy, and all the other kids were playing, singing the same nursery rhyme, 8 for silver. Timmy asked all of them to move to the wood field and know the truth behind the scary dreams they all had. They walked to the place, and Charlotte challenged Timmy to dig it up and get the silver teeth. Timmy accepted the challenge, but Edward tried to stop him. He didn't stop and finally got the silver teeth. In the next scene, Timmy placed the teeth in his jaw, and some spiritual powers of the teeth attacked Edward on his neck. Charlotte ran toward home and asked for help. Mr. Laurent brought Edward in his lap to the house and instantly asked to fetch the doctor. He treated him and gave him painkillers. They thought some wild animal had bitten Edward, and Charlotte didn't speak about Timmy and what happened in the wood fields as per the commitment. In the next scene, Charlotte had the same scary dream and woke up with a jerk. She moved to Edward's room to check on him. He found something moving under the sheet. She removed it and saw some roots-like structures moving on the Edward's body. She got scared and rushed toward her parents' room. They all moved to see Edward, but he was missing. They all collectively moved towards the woods to find Edward, but in vain. Molière, the receptionist and lieutenant, knocked at the pathologist's door and told him about Edward's missing. In the next scene, Charlotte goes to the church where Timmy was waiting for her already. Timmy was holding a book about silver teeth and tore a page and gave it to Charlotte to help him find Edward. Timmy asked Charlotte about telling the truth and biting Edward with the silver teeth. Charlotte remembered the oath that all of the children made before all this happened. They all committed not to tell anyone anything before moving to the wood fields. The maid of Charlotte suddenly appeared there, and Timmy ran away. Charlotte returned to the house, and Timmy rushed towards the field, where he saw Edward at a distance. He ran towards him, calling his name, and suddenly an unknown creature moved towards Timmy and attacked his hand. The animal bit his hand, and Timmy started running toward the woods. He found a place and lay there. He pushed a page of the same book from his pocket and read it. The scene switches to Edward's father, Mr. Laurent, where John and Molière reached there to analyze the disappearance of Edward. They moved to where Timmy rushed. They entered and saw Timmy's body, which was stinking and covered with worms. The pathologist considered it an attack by some wild animal, perhaps a wolf, and the lieutenant asked to file a report about Timmy's death and the disappearance of Edward. On the other hand, there is a cholera pandemic surrounding the country, as stated by Molière. In the next scene, John is allowed to stay at Laurent's house, telling him the whole story. He said that Charlotte was in shock due to his brother's missing, and that's why she could not tell anything. Charlotte's mother entered the room, and Mr. Laurent introduced her to John. They talked about finding Edward. John asked about seeing Edward's room. In the next scene, they moved to Edward's room, and he checked the sheets. John asked to see the whole house. He found a blood spot at the main entrance and asked to keep all the windows shut as a precaution. The scene switches to the dining table, and after that, Isabelle is playing piano, and Charlotte starts crying by remembering his brother. Anaiza, maid, lets Charlotte to her room. They put wooden blocks at all of the windows. In the next scene, John is sleeping and has the same horror dream, but this time is slightly different. He dug it up the place and got silver teeth, and suddenly she turned backward where a lady and a girl was waving at him. Suddenly, the bird scarer disappeared, and it was standing behind the lady and girl, who are probably John's relatives, perhaps wife and daughter. An evil spirit of a lady appeared very close to John, and he woke up instantly. In the next scene, he moved out of his room, holding a candle in his hand, and entered another room. In the next scene, Charlotte sadly asked about the situation or any mishaps that would be supposed to happen to them. Mr. Laurent instantly replied to remain steadfast in the situation, and they continued eating. In the next scene, John collected the blood spot at the entrance gate, examined it under a microscope, and then compared it to his blood sample. He found a minor difference and continued his research. John saw a very unusual thing outside the house and asked Mr. Laurent to fetch a riffle. They moved outside but found nothing. They immediately called a meeting of all the town leaders and talked about the situation. John advised them to remain in the houses and shut their windows. They also spoke about the gypsies' history. They thought of the attacker as a madman or wolf. In the next scene, 3 people from the town, Jacob, Callum, and Anne Mary, moved toward the woods to collect some straws, and they got attacked by some massive wild dragon-type creature, killing Jacob and Callum, and Mary got bitten by it. Mary somehow managed to run and return to the town. John asked about it and moved to see what happened with her, but she got missing like Edward. In the next scene, John asks everyone to move to the church and fetch food and water under armed escorts. He considered the place unsafe for all people. On the other hand, Anne Mary is in the woods, crying for water and roaming around, very injured and helpless. Suddenly, the roots-like structures surrounded her all around and pulled him under the water in a nearby pool, and she disappeared. In the next scene, John was sitting outside. Isabel moved out of the room for some water, and they saw each other and started a conversation. Isabel asked John about his family, and he told the story of Garden, where a group of gypsies was stationed, and 13 people killed by a beast that seemed like a wolf or something. His wife and daughter were among them. He called the beast a curse to the place. Isabel told him about the gypsies, which her husband killed long ago, and they faced the same silver curse. Mr. Laurent appeared and shouted to stop her from telling the truth about snatching the land from the gypsies. He forbade John to interfere in anything and asked him to help them. In the next scene, John is in the woods and making arrangements to capture or kill the beast. He dug up a large hole, and after so much work, he got tired and sat near a wall, dreaming of his wife and daughter's death. Suddenly, John felt the beast behind the wall and attacked it. It got captured, and he shot him. In the next scene, John and his team put the beast into ropes and bring it home. John cut the beast's skin, and Anne Mary was inside it. Saul, a man with a rifle, was asked to kill Anne Mary, and he shot her. John started talking about the gypsies and the old lady buried alive and cursed the land of Juvedon. Mr. Laurent first refused all this but stopped shouting when talked about Edward. Laurent claimed to be the one who was responsible for this. He surrendered himself to save his family and the people of the town. They decided to burn the beast. On the other hand, Charlotte's Nana, grandmother, is leaving the place, and she is crying to stop her. At the same time, Isabel and John talked about the old lady buried alive and her curse. She showed him the picture of the place. In the next scene, John, Laurent, and the elders move to Gevedon to find the truth and talk about Timmy's knowledge of silver teeth. John and Isabel asked Charlotte about the situation, and she told them the whole truth. She handed them the silver teeth and gave them the page Timmy gave her. On the other hand, Anasa moved out of the house and heard some unusual noise. She got scared, and suddenly the beast attacked her and bit her. She was about to die, but the beast left her and moved to another side. Anasa is helping herself out with the injuries and crying. In the next scene, John melts silver teeth with the help of a blacksmith, and the Molière arrives there knowing the situation. The scene switches to Anasa, where she welcomed Mr. Laurent at home and served him dinner. John was examining the house and saw the blood on the lawn where Anasa got attacked. He inquired, but Mr. Laurent asked him to leave the place. They both argued furiously, and John decided to stay until the army arrived. On the other hand, Charlotte is missing Edward and crying, and Isabel is making her calm down. Anasa is trying to keep herself calm, but she has the same rope-like structures same as Edward. Mr. Laurent noticed some unusual sounds and moved behind them. It was Anasa's room, and the beast attacked him. Luckily, he had a rifle in his hand, and he shot it. John and Isabel rushed towards the noise. On the other hand, Isabel tells John about Mr. Laurent and the beast who moved outside. John asked to save Charlotte and walked to look for Seamus. He found him at a place where he was sitting beside a bottle of petrol and fire in his hand. Anasa was shot dead. He burnt himself alive and said he had seen the flames in his dreams every night. Seamus asked for an apology from Charlotte and Isabel. John tried to stop him but couldn't. The whole house is on fire. Isabel and Charlotte are trying to escape, and they meet John at the gate. The three of them are moving towards the church, which is only the safe place left. In the next scene, they run towards the church and find the beast in the woods who tried to attack, but they escaped. Charlotte found her Nana dead in the woods, and she cried. John is protecting them from the beast and running simultaneously. Finally, they reached the church where all the other people had gathered earlier. Men asked about Seamus and the beast, and they argued against fighting with it directly, but John told them about the silver bullet, which is only the hope left behind. He asked them to wait for the daylight. In the next scene, John gives a wooden toy, a soldier on a horse, to Seamus's friend and a pat on his back and sits next to Isabel. He told about Seamus's apology and death to Isabel. She is melancholy and crying for her son's life in front of God. Meanwhile, she heard a cry for help from Edward outside the church. In the next scene, Isabel opened the door after hearing the voice of Edward, but there was no Edward but the beast. It attacked the church's people, and John tried to kill it. Isabel sacrificed herself for his son Edward and stayed in front of the beast. John shouted at her to move away, but she did not move. With a heavy heart, John fired Isabel, and the silver bullet crossed Isabel's body and entered the beast's body. The whole church is bludgeoned, and Edward moves out of the beast's body. Isabel died, and Edward got his life back. The soldier who had the silver bullet at the beginning of the movie was Edward Laurent, who survived the curse of the old lady. The doctor removed the silver thing from Edward's body. It was the same silver that John melted and carved in the form of shells. In the last scene, Charlotte, Edward, and John are moving in with John, and he considers them their children. John tightly hugged Edward and tried to calm him. On the other hand, the scene switches to the present. After 35 years, John is on his deathbed, Charlotte is sitting beside him, and Edward is dead as a soldier. The left 4 silver bullets are on the shelf next to John's bed. The movie ends here. Thanks for watching.